Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and this is the under £500 gaming PC for those on a pretty limited budget. Keep watching to find out how we put it all together. Okay, so today's video we'll be taking a look at a budget PC. Surprise, surprise on this channel, who would have thought? But here we have the less than £500 gaming PC. This is just for the tower unit itself. And we're going to go through today, look at the components we've chosen, also look at PC Part Picker, and look at some potential things I would have changed. And also we'll talk about some of the compromises that we've made here, but also we have done some pretty cool things. We have had a little bit of future-proof in here. So this isn't one of those PCs where you spend £500 or thereabouts, and then when you want to upgrade, you basically got to replace everything. It's got a pretty good foundation and is ready to go for some pretty serious upgrades, should you have the budget and should you want to. So let's get on with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn this off because, well, it's a little bit on the noisy side, so you could possibly hear the fans now. Maybe you can't. It's something that I don't like, but some of you may be able to put up with it. But certainly for me, for filming, it's a little bit of a pain, so yeah, that's a little bit quieter. So this is pretty much based around the Gamemax Spark case, which you can see here, which has been adorned with a Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To sticker, which you can pick up from our merch store. Shameless plug, sorry about that. This actually was sent to us by Ugly Bob, bless his heart, and finally got to use it on a nice white case, which is the Gamemax Spark, which is a micro ATX case. Lots of features, lots of flexibility, relatively straightforward to build in, although if you watch the live stream on how this was actually built, which I'll put some links in the video description, this was on our Christmas Eve live stream. It was quite a long one, and there was a few little twists and turns along the way. Things didn't go exactly as planned, mostly down to my own errors, but anyway, it is what it is, and certainly if you want to check that out, please feel free to do so. But overall, the case itself actually is really good. Airflow is excellent on it, no problems there, and for a micro ATX case with a pretty small form factor, if you haven't got a lot of room on your desk, but you still want to put all your components in there, maybe a large CPU cooler, maybe a large power supply, decent motherboard, all that kind of stuff, it's absolutely fine. And with the right set of fans in there, you can get this thing to run extremely cool, which is excellent. In order to get everything all up and running and also provide us with a little bit of an upgrade path, we've got the B550M Phantom Gaming 4 from ASRock. This, at the time, was the cheapest micro ATX motherboard here in the United Kingdom on the new market. All of these products are basically new. There may be a couple which will swap in and swap out kind of potentially other second-hand items that you may want to look at, but when it comes to motherboard, I think it's probably worth going for a new one. This one specifically, because it's a B550 chipset, we've got a little bit of future-proof in here, so if you wanted to, you could put in a Ryzen 9 5950 if you want to at a later date when they come down in price. The board will certainly take it. The VRMs possibly aren't the best on the actual platform, but they certainly will get the job done as long as you're not looking at any serious overclocking. Other things on the motherboard, it's not got any real frills to it, so we don't have any Wi-Fi, so you will need to budget for that. It doesn't have any Bluetooth, so if Bluetooth is important to you, you will need to budget for a Bluetooth dongle, but realistically you can pick up both of those items for somewhere in the region of about £10. If you look for a motherboard with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth built in, you're possibly going to be looking at an extra £40 to £50 here in the UK at the moment, so certainly there is a way of saving a few quid. When it comes to RAM, we've gone with 16 gigs of RAM, which I feel is pretty much the minimum you should be using with a new system these days. You could, of course, go for 32 gigs. Depending on when you're watching this, you may find that memory pricing has shot back up again. At the moment, it's at a pretty low ebb. I've actually chosen in this particular video to use some V-Color Prism RAM, which is a really nice RAM, looks great, DDR4 3200, which is absolutely fine. Although in the actual build, when we did the live video, we did put in some G-Skill RAM, which was DDR4 4266, which was kindly supplied to us by William Bodie. Thank you very much, William. But I've decided to replace that because it's a little bit wasted in here for what this system actually needs. But if you are looking to buy now, then I would certainly recommend shopping around for RAM, and there are other options available, which we'll show you in the PC Part Picker list in a short while. When it comes to the heart of the system, we've gone with something which is slightly controversial. This is AMD's Ryzen 5 4500. This is effectively a 4600G with the graphics side of it fused off. It runs at a pretty decent speed. We were running almost all the time here at 4.2 gigahertz in the system. It has got a base clock of around 3.5, 3.6 gigahertz, and it says on the box it's a 4.1 gigahertz boost, but the ASRock board was certainly pushing it a very slight little bit higher. due to the fact that Precision Boost Overdrive was turned on. It runs really cool, very cheap to get. You can pick these up for somewhere in the region of about £75 here at the moment on the UK market, which I feel is excellent value for money. Alternatives to this, Ryzen 5 3600, if you're getting one on the second-hand market, but you're still going to be paying somewhere in the region of between £70 to £100, depending on who and where you're buying it from. Graphics card wise is going to be, again, very much a bone of contention. Now, we've actually gone with the MLLSE RX 580. This is an 8GB card, but is the SP2048, which is basically a cut down version. We picked this one up from AliExpress for somewhere in the region of about £77, although, as some of you who watch the channel regularly will know, it's not been exactly plain sailing. So alternatively, you may want to budget a little bit more for picking up a graphics card off the shelf, or maybe a second-hand one on somewhere like Facebook Marketplace. But certainly if you want to bring that cost down and you're prepared to take a few risks, and you don't mind the fans being a little bit on the noisy side, then I think £77 for an RX 580, even be it a cut down version, is a pretty good deal, and actually runs games really well, as you'll see later on. When it comes to cooling, I've actually gone with something which was just here, which we had. So this is Kolink's EX180. Just a generic 120mm tower cooler with addressable RGB lighting on. Now, of course, because the processor actually comes with the Wraith Stealth cooler, you could just use that and save yourself somewhere in the region of about £30, which this actually costs. Or alternatively, we have got another option when we go through the PC part picker list, which again may save you a few quid and also is kind of almost identical to this. Storage wise, we've gone for a brand new drive. Makes sense, especially with NVMEs, M.2s, you really don't know how they've been used or abused and how much data's gone through them. They do have a limited lifespan, so I would suggest, especially seeing the prices are so low at the moment, it's really worth going out and getting a brand new one. We've gone with the Kingston NV2, which is a 1TB NVMe drive, PCI Express Gen 4x4, so works absolutely fine with our B550 chipset. Although some of you are probably screaming out in the chat already that the processor doesn't actually support PCI Express Gen 4. Don't worry, it is fully backwards compatible. Power supply wise, again, another bone of contention. I'm actually using a Gamemax power supply in here. This is their Rampage 850 watt. This is a bronze unit. This is probably overkill, but I have budgeted somewhere in the region of about £40 for a power supply. Now, of course, you can get whatever you want on there. There are other options available. I've often used the Cylon from Aerocool. Those are great little power supplies. Again, it's only a bronze and they are a little bit on the cheap side, but in general, I've found them to be very efficient and do what they need to do. And as of yet, I've yet to have one catch on fire, which is a bonus. Other things which we put in here, which could again affect your budget, which you could certainly save a few pounds if you wanted to. When it comes to the actual fans, we've gone with the Saturn. This is the ASN140s, 140mm fans from our friends over at InWin. There's 3 of these installed. We've got 2 in the top acting as exhausts, and we've got 1 in the bottom pushing air in towards our graphics card and the path of the CPU and also the power supply. We have chosen as well to add a supplementary fan into this system, so just as an exhaust, basically because I was peer pressured into doing it in the live stream. So in the rear we've got one of these. This is the Montech Metal 120 PWM. Great fan. Doesn't need a great deal of other things attached, such as addressable RGB wiring, etc. So it just plugs into the back. It's got a really decent motor on here, 6-pole motor, runs very well, very quiet, and fully PWM controlled. And yeah, looks absolutely great in the back of the PC. So that's the parts we've used. Let's head over to the computer now and we'll look at PC Part Picker and we'll discuss some of the options and take a closer look at the pricing. Okay, so this is the PC Part Picker saved parts list. I'll put links for this in the video description so you can check out for yourselves and make any amendments you want to, and obviously pick up some of the items that we've got in this list. So as we said already, Ryzen 5 4500, 3.6 GHz, 6-core processor, 12 threads, $74.99 currently here in the United Kingdom, which I think is actually stellar value. It runs extremely well, and in fact, while we went into Cinebench and did some Cinebench runs, I actually managed to get a better score with this processor in Cinebench R23 than I did with my previous Ryzen 5 3600 with very similar settings. So there is quite a lot of potential in this processor despite it having the slightly lower naming structure. But anyway, so £75 for that. Cooler wise, like I said, there are other options out there. At the moment, this one is kind of the one that I tend to go with. This is the ID Cooling SE214, available from Amazon on Prime next day, $19.98. If you wanted to, you could just omit that altogether and use the Wraith Stealth, as we said before, and save yourself £20. With the motherboard, we've gone, on this particular instance, rather than sticking with our ASRock B550M Phantom Gaming 4, I've gone with the Gigabyte B550M DS3H. Now, there's a couple of reasons for it. One of which is, I must admit, I don't like ASRock BIOS. I don't like their fan control, and for me, having full control of my fans and having it nice and easy, and also the RGB, the addressable RGB in ASRock software is hideous. I'll be completely upfront about that. It is an awful thing. It's extremely buggy, but potentially you might find favourable results with the Gigabyte B550M DS3H, again, very popular board, 4 out of 5 stars on here, and a kind of similar price at the moment. In stock, Tech Next Day doing it for $89.99, which is a very similar price to what we paid for our ASRock board, so potentially worth a look there. If, like I said again, if you're maybe thinking about saving money elsewhere, you could potentially ditch the fans and also ditch the CPU cooler. That's going to give you about another £30. You could then possibly go for something like one of the MSI boards, maybe an MSI B550M mortar. That would be a very good shout, but again, it is down to the individual and what you want to do. If you need more information, head over to the Discord and we'll try and point you in the right direction. With the RAM, like I said, we have gone with V-Color in our particular setup, but getting hold of that in certain places is a bit challenging, to say the least. The Patriot Viper Steel 16 gig kits available from eBuyer, $46.98 plus $151 shipping and handling, generally in stock, and normally most places are under £50. It has been as low as £46.50. It has gone up very, very slightly, but it's a decent set of RAM. Looks nice, does the job, and this is DDR4 3600 CL18 as opposed to our DDR4 3200 CL16. So it's kind of swings and roundabouts. You lose a little bit of latency, but you gain a little bit of frequency. As I said, with the Kingston drive, so again, very good pricing. These seem to be dropping more and more. Currently in stock, it's CCL, £46.70, and also CCL do some pretty good deals if you buy more than 2 components. So when you get your 3rd component, you quite often will get 5% off your total order value. So again, that will bring it down a little bit more if you need to, if you're saving every penny. The graphics card, the MLLSE RX 580 8GB SP2048, which yeah, we've had some ups and downs with, but £77 for this level of performance, I feel is actually really good value for money. It's very similar, if not better, than the RX 6500 XT, which has all its own problems as well. But for £77, I think we can excuse some of that. Gamemax Spark in white, as we've said, so $62.99 is the current price for that. At the moment, case prices seem to be going through the roof. You get the occasional deal every now and then, but it seems that the traditional kind of £40 and £50 cases are now becoming £60 and £70 cases, and the whole stack is moving up in price. So I feel this is actually pretty decent value for money. It's good build quality and all that kind of stuff. USB-C on the front as well, which I like quite a lot. Power supply wise, now this is where I've kind of buckled under pressure from some of you in the comments section. So we've actually gone with the Seasonic core here. This is the GC 500 watt 80 plus gold. A great power supply. Seasonic don't really make a bad power supply. This, I believe, isn't actually made by them, but is under their kind of strict guidance. So for £45, I think it's a pretty decent deal. With power supplies, there's often deals available, and you can see lots of other things on the market. So it might be worth playing the waiting game, but with this, you've got Seasonic, you've got 7 years warranty, 80 plus gold. So if you do want to do some upgrades, you've got a little bit of headroom there. But again, down to the individual. So with all that said and done, we're looking at a total of, with this particular setup, as today's pricing, at £475.13. And that is with our extra things like the CPU cooler, which we could take off. I haven't put the fan on there, which is kind of like here and there. The actual fan set from InWin is somewhere in the region of about £35–40. So that is going to push it slightly over that 500. So maybe you don't want to go with the fans straight away. Entirely up to you, like I said previously. So that's the pricing of it, but does it actually perform any good? Let's take a look. So taking a look at some examples of gameplay footage. Now I do apologise, this gameplay footage has been recorded at a slightly lower bitrate, so there are a few more jaggies than are actually on screen. Do trust me when I say that the screen actually in play does look very nice. So yeah, please ignore the jaggies. It isn't helped by the fact that we are playing Wreckfest here in the snow, which is actually extremely enjoyable, and as you can see by the frame rates here, we're getting some pretty decent frames. We're looking in the region of somewhere about 100 frames per second, and we are getting up to, in some places, up to 120, 130, depending where you are. But very fluid. This is 1080p, high settings, and it runs really, really well. My driving isn't the best, and in these snowy, icy conditions, We did manage to keep it in the #1 position for a little while, but we didn't hold on to it for very long. But again, when it comes to this sort of game, Breakfast is one of those more graphically demanding titles, even though it is a slightly older title, but it still does look great and you can really crank up the settings should you wish to. But yeah, overall, like I said, the CPU is basically untouched, running at 42 degrees Celsius, about 15–16% usage, but still pegged at 4.2 megahertz or gigahertz. And the GPU, as you can see, the GPU actually runs really cool because the fans are a little bit on the noisy side. We're looking at 54 degrees Celsius on the GPU, pegged it 100%, and it doesn't throttle or do anything. It just runs very nice and very cool, but yeah, a little bit on the noisy side. So next up, we've got some Rocket League. Now I went in and obviously turned off lens flares and blur and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, again, it's still running very, very nicely. This is a pretty easy title to run. 1080p high settings, 200 frames per second is pretty much where it was. It goes up and down as this game tends to, but still runs very nice, very smooth. Again, my apologies for the slightly lackluster capture there. It isn't the best, and possibly after YouTube is put its compression on it as well, it's probably not going to look much better. But it's very fluid, plays well. 52 degrees Celsius on the GPU again, so still running very cool, but kind of pegged out 100% all the time. Again, our CPU is running extremely cool at that 43 degrees Celsius, which is in roughly about a 22 degrees Celsius room, which is, yeah, it's keeping some very, very nice temperatures indeed. This case does do wonders. Granted, obviously this chassis is quite small, got some decent fans in there, and these components aren't really taxing it a great deal, but just goes to show that you can keep the temperatures under control very easily in a micro ATX chassis. So next up, we've got the synthetics. So this is Time Spy from 3D Mark, and as you can see, this does give it a little bit of stress. So we're looking at around about 30 frames per second, give or take, under some of the better circumstances. So yeah, it's not going to set the world on fire, but still, it's running really cool. It's still around about the 39–40 degrees Celsius. It is starting to warm up a bit. This was one of the first tests I actually did on the system. But yeah, it's managing to do what it needs to do. And when we got towards the end, we did get actually a particularly good score, which was nice to see. So our Time Spy score was 41.36, which is classed as great. The average score being 37.06 and the best being 41.68. So we just narrowly missed out there, getting the best possible score with this combination of hardware. So yeah, pretty impressed with that. It seems to have done really well. Again, it's still a relatively low score for what it is, but we are spending less than £500 on a brand new PC here, so do take that into consideration. As I said earlier, with Cinebench R23, not bad at all. We've still got those 6 cores, 12 threads, and the system chugged along quite nicely, and we did get a score of 9,205 points, which actually is pretty decent. And if you look at the Ryzen 7 1700X, which is 8-core 16 thread, that only scored 8,889 points. So we're beating a flagship processor from the first generation of Ryzen, which would have at the time cost in excess of $350 maybe, whereas this is £75. It's incredible how the actual AM4 platform has progressed. Back to gaming now, so we've got CSGO, and this is a deathmatch, so all of this is running off the processor, so the processor is doing the mathematics and all that kind of stuff for all the players, myself, the graphics, everything is going on. So as you can see, frame rates were in about 170 frames per second. It does go up and down quite drastically on here. We do get up to almost 300 frames per second in places, which is kind of to be expected with a 1080p setup like this. But yeah, it runs really fluidly, as you can see from the section down the bottom. You can see the variants, and you can see your FPS, all that kind of stuff. And it just, yeah, it runs really well. And actually, I did surprisingly well with the shotgun, which I don't normally do, so that was a little bit of a bonus. But yeah, it runs great. If CSGO is your jam, then yeah, I think you're going to be pretty happy with this. Next up is going to be one of my old favourites. This is Far Cry 5 New Dawn. And again, 1080p, this is medium-high settings, a little bit tweaked slightly. But yeah, it runs really well. As you can see, frames per second there, in the 80 frames per second kind of region, with a little bit of action going on there. And just getting one of the loot crates come down there, picking up everything, fighting off the natives, and shooting a bird, as you do. Pick up some stuff, do some looting. Oh yeah, 95 frames per second, 100 frames per second. is relatively easy on this. This isn't the most modern of game, but certainly for a £75 or £77 graphics card and a £75 processor, I think this is doing remarkably well. And I remember when this game first came out, I actually ended up upgrading my system and buying a GTX 1070 just so I could play it. So it just goes to show that the RX 580, the SP 2048, even though it doesn't cost a great deal of money, can still play these games and is a very enjoyable experience. Pretty much constantly around that 90 frames per second, and even when we go into things like the helicopter and stuff, then you're still getting a lot of frames per second, even though you've got a much wider field of view in terms of what is going on and everything being processed. Again, when it comes to temperatures, still around that 55 degrees mark. We're at about 100% pegged pretty much most of the time, but we're still getting the 1250-ish megahertz from that clock on this RX 580. So yeah, pretty good overall. Enjoyable experience, runs well. There's no real big dips or anything, as you can see by the frame rate graph. There's a couple of odd little spikes, but in general, it's yeah, pretty much plain sailing. So there you go, there is some gameplay results from this modest little micro ATX system. Again, there are some things which I would change out, as I said, in the PC part picker list. Potentially swapping out the motherboard. I don't think this was the greatest decision for this particular setup. I don't like the fan control or the RGB control on these ASRock boards. I know it's just a software thing, so potentially things can get better, but I do still find, love it or hate it, MSI motherboards do seem to do much, much better when it comes to addressable RGB control and also fan control, because I do find with this, with PWM, it will go to the PWM limits of the fan, whereas MSI boards generally, you can find out what the PWM speeds are, but then you can still tweak it over and above those PWM speeds. So if, for instance, on this, it recognises the fan as having a lowest speed of 800 RPM, on an MSI board, you could probably bring that down to maybe 500, 400, or maybe even stop it altogether, whereas for some reason the ASRock boards just don't like doing that at all, regardless if you do it in the BIOS or if you do it in the software. Other things, obviously, if you wanted to, you could omit these fans, put something else in altogether. If you don't like RGB or addressable RGB, you can leave it as plain as you like, because it's quite a nice looking box on its own anyway, as you can see from the B-roll we filmed as well. But yeah, overall, I've got to say, for under £500 and potentially even closer to £400 if you take out things like the cooler and some of the fans, etc., it's an incredible gaming PC for what it is. And also, don't forget, obviously, it's not just for gaming. You can use it for things like streaming, content creation, all that kind of stuff. It's not going to be great for those sorts of things, but certainly it will get the job done pretty easily. And for this sort of price, I don't think you can complain too much. But being this is YouTube and people do complain, let me know what your thoughts are on this particular little box. I'm really happy with it, I've got to be honest with you. I think Gamemax have, again, done something very good. They do come up with a little bit of hit and miss on their cases, as I've said before, but I think the Spark range is excellent, and I'm really looking forward to the ATX version of it, which hopefully won't be too far away, but yeah, we'll see how that goes when it comes out. So I think that's going to wrap things up. Any comments or questions, stick them in the comment section below, but for now, I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.